Hello, my name is Rayanna and I am going to do a quick interview surrounding the topic of medical racism. I just want to give a little bit of background information on the topic of medical racism. Medical racism is the systematic and widespread racism against people of color within the medical system. It includes both racism in our society that makes Black people less healthy, like access to health care, and the discrepancies in health coverage by race. The biases also held by healthcare providers also affect the racism in the healthcare system. Medical racism is a huge issue in the medical field. It's existed since, if not before, the early 1700s, and many Black women experience medical racism to this day, especially in terms of childbirth and pain. Medical racism is rarely addressed, if at all, as an issue, and it's oftentimes overlooked in society, not because medical racism isn't important and not because people do not care about medical racism, but because people do not know about it and they don't know it exists, or they're taught to believe that it's not a thing. I will now show you the responses of two women that I've interviewed about their encounters and their feelings towards medical racism. Thank you.
So, I can't clarify that if it was racism or a protocol, but um, one year I got my teeth, I got a root canal. No, I got my wisdom teeth taken out. And that week I was off of work and I had started having like severe stomach pain, pain that I've never received before. And usually I don't go to like the emergency room just because sometimes we self medicate. So I ended up going to the emergency room and I drove myself there. So when I was able to get back into a room, they, asked me a series of questions and then um, they instantly wanted to put me on morphine. Um, and I myself, don't recommend those type of drugs to be put inside my body. The only thing I would take is like ibuprofen or something like that. And I had like refused the morphine. And another reason why I refused it is because they didn't know the seriousness, or they didn't even know what was really going on with me. They just wanted to put me on it to like take away the pain, or I don't even know. But I refused it, and I ended up having to drive to the hospital. So that's why I was like, I can't take this because I have to drive back home, and they still wanted me to. They still wanted me to put. They still wanted to put me on it. So I said no, and then a doctor came in and he was like, "Well, why are you refusing the meds?" And I'm like, "Well, you guys haven't even took the time to see what was really wrong with me. You haven't did any tests or anything, and how can you just put me on a severe drug like that? I think it's a suppressant. I'm not even sure what it is, but I know it. They say that it helps take away all the pain. And I'm just like, well, you guys just want me to take all. You just want to take all the way the pain right now, and then when I leave here, all the pain's gonna come back. So I ended up refusing it, and when I got home, I still was in pain because they didn't treat me in the emergency room, and I have this perspective that like they don't come there to. I mean, you don't when you come to a hospital, they don't they temporarily treat you, and they do not permanently help the situation. Um, so yeah, I kind of thought it was a little bit about race, but I also was just like, this might be protocol. But I personally wouldn't just automatically put somebody on something, not even knowing the severity of the situation, just knowing, oh, her stomach hurts and she had a root canal, I mean her wisdom teeth pulled and etc. You know what I mean? But I ended up going to another hospital and I had swallowed too much blood from the holes, and they gave me some medicine to help soothe my stomach.
Yes, I have experienced medical racism. I have experienced medical racism through the emergency room. I went into the emergency room for kidney stones. My blood pressure was high due to the pain. Once the triage took place, the physician came into the room and he asked me, was I on drugs? And I told the physician, I don't do drugs. I've never been on drugs. And I felt very offended because he asked me that without even examination, without speaking to me about my history, and the fact that the hospital was in a predominantly white neighborhood. And rumors, I believe, was that black people come to these areas to get drugs, Percocets, Vicodins, things like that. And so I felt like I was being um, targeted as a black female that didn't live in the neighborhood to come get drugs. Um, I immediately told the nurse, I don't want to see that doctor anymore. And I was able to get another doctor that treated me for my kidney stones. We got the x rays proving that I had kidney stones. And then at that time, I did receive the medication to help me with my situation at that time. And I think that that was my personal experience being targeted as a black female in a predominantly white neighborhood with their local hospital and being targeted as a person because of my skin color and in the rumors that was being said.
Do you believe that a lack of access to healthcare has to do with race? Definitely. Um, the word race and access um, plays a big role in resources and um, education on self care, health. Um, just to give an example, um, people who aren't educated to go to the doctors every once a year, they don't do it. So their health overall deteriorates, because they're not taking care of themselves. And that has a lot to do with healthcare, race, and access. And oftentimes we don't have hospitals or medical centers in our communities. So transportation could be a thing for access. And then coming back to the question of like working class, low middle class, some people can't afford to pay house bills along with medical bills or even purchasing insurance to be able to go to the hospital or to the doctors and not have a huge cost factor to their bill. So, yeah, I do believe that access plays a big role into the disparities of racism and race in healthcare.
I believe that the lack of providers in the black community doesn't always deal with race as much as it does with insurance. Most urban communities has a high government insurance, meaning Medicaid, Medicare. And because of that, a provider doesn't necessarily get paid what they would with other insurances. So, because of that, the black community lacks providers. You may have some hospitals that have substations, that accepts the Medicaid, the Medicare, but on a whole, I believe our community is lacking healthcare providers because of insurance, because of what you have. Your most urban communities are covered by single parents, or the parents is making less than minimum wage, making minimum wage or less, and can't and or their jobs, the premium is so high they can't even afford the premium to have decent insurance. So which takes us now to Medicare, Medicaid, and most providers are, they limit their Medicare, Medicaid patients. So now the black community is lacking providers, and those providers, are few.
So, if I'm understanding this question correctly, I think our society plays a huge role into the ignorance um, of medical racism. Um, I feel like oftentimes because we're not educated on what it really is, and that's something I think Rihanna is going to talk to you guys about. Our education levels are low in it, so we don't notice those things, in which we can't bring it to society's attention because we have lack of knowledge of what it is in the beginning. So,
I really don't know if society is ignoring medical racism, um, or is it just been covered up really well? I personally think that medical racism has been covered up very well. I think that when we begin to share more stories of how a person was discriminated by medically for whatever medical reason, if it's a mental illness reason, if it's a mother who wants to breastfeed her child or or pump for her child, or a father has a sick child but he can't get off because if he gets off he's going to lose his job. I think there's so many ways that needs to be exposed, but I believe that society, if we talk more about it, if we share more about it, make it more aware, then it wouldn't be so easily to ignore.
Hello. So, after reviewing the responses from the two women that I interviewed, I now have a broader understanding of medical racism. I now understand that medical racism is not only refusing someone care or the refusal of the proper medications necessary, but it can also be just throwing medications onto someone because they lack the desire to help and truly get an understanding of what is wrong with this individual. Um, and I feel like that is an effect of what healthcare providers are being taught in school, and and it's seen in their practices. I also noticed how after the reviewing the responses that the lack of access to healthcare in Black communities is one form of medical racism that has trickled down from another form of racism in America. White people having access to good paying jobs is it's very hard for people in Black communities to have access to nice paying jobs and good insurance, and therefore most Black people in Black communities have Medicaid and Medicare, and a lot of healthcare offices are leaving because they don't want the pay that they get from Medicaid and Medicare. And that is like it shows how racism not only trickles down from one form to another, but it shows that it's a racism is a domino effect, and that is the systematic racism not only destroys in one way, but it's a continuous oppression and disadvantage from different fields and different systems. And that was a huge eye opener for me, and I'm so glad that I was able to learn this in this interview and to get this interview process done.